You are now about to listen to an exciting story about a young orphan who rose to become the queen of a great empire. Unknowingly, she was going to be subjected into a difficult situation which could possibly even cost her her life. Well, I invite you to get to the end of this story to discover the final fate of this woman. This is a fictional narrative, though based mostly from a historical account. The title of this story is If I Perish, I Perish. It was a crisp and bright morning. Little hummingbirds buzzed about a trellis of petunias, while bluebirds and pigeons perched on branches which extended to an open window sang their chirpy songs. The purple and white sheer curtains, hung on silver rings and violet ropes, swayed gently as the soft wind came in and out at its pleasure. It was no ordinary day. Esther was finally to be crowned queen over the vast Persian Empire in place of Vashti, who had been banished and dethroned. The former spouse of the king had insulted the monarch when he had asked for her to appear before him and his most important officials during a high celebration years ago. Feeling too lofty, she succumbed to her vanity and she had refused him. The king was outraged, as were his top counselors, and so commenced the fall of the queen from her throne. In lieu of her vacant position, the most beautiful and eligible ladies of the land were handpicked and dormed under the watchful care of the eunuch master Haggai and his staff. They were cared for and one by one taken to the king for him to pick whoever he would fancy to be his next wife. When Esther was presented, she was beyond par, for her beauty exceeded all others. She came into the royal chambers in full splendor. She was fitted in a gown of fine material, in pure white, but with intricately woven embossed dyed flowers made from the same material. The design ran down from the left sleeve, circled her waist, and cascaded in a myriad of soft colors up to the hem. On her head, a band of fresh blooms sat on silky, tawny, and curly tresses. She was just the picture of femininity and radiance. Her wide eyes with thick lashes twinkled when she smiled demurely. Her heart-shaped face, flushed cheeks, slightly upturned nose, and rose-colored lips created an epic picture of wonder. The king had been smitten right away. He could not take his eyes off of her for a long, long time. Yes, time had sped up for the young bride-to-be. It had been years at the harem, but it seemed only days, for she had made sure to follow the instructions of Haggai, which made life very easy for her. She was grateful that high favor was shown to her by the one in charge of the household. She was given the best accommodations, the most efficient of servants, and the finest of food and clothing. Everything was luxurious, and she felt very well pampered. So thus, when it had been her turn to be presented to the king, she was already well prepared. King Ahasuerus also had only been kind, gentle, loving, and gave her his highest regard the moment she set foot into the inner court. To everyone, it was a very evident choice from the onset, as many at the palace admired Esther for her physical attributes as well as her warm personality. So the crown which was offered to her was not a thorough surprise. Everyone expected for her to take preeminence among the hundreds of elite maidens. On the day of her dawning, her coronation was as resplendent as the day she was presented to the king for the first time. She dropped on her knees to thank God for the blessings he had lavished upon her. She was a nobody, actually just an orphan, but she acknowledged that because of the Almighty's guidance, she had risen above her circumstance. Still reeling from the extravagant celebration of her wedding, she did not forget to remember where she came from. As she marveled at the gifts piled on her gold-gilded couch, Her heart brimmed with gratitude. It seemed just like yesterday, when her much older cousin took her as his charge, when she was just a very, very young girl. She had lost both parents at a very tender age. When her father Abihail passed away, Mordecai had been quick to take responsibility of her. Although she didn't have all she wanted growing up, to her, she still had the best childhood, for her adoptive parent loved her and treated her as his own child. She had been taught so many things under his care and tutelage. She owed so much to her dear cousin. How he watched over her protectively, as a father would his beloved child. Esther's heart fluttered, for Mordecai still continued to take his responsibility of her very seriously. He still looked after her even after she had transferred to live at the royal residence. He would arrive daily without fail at the gates of the palace to hear of news from her and to convey his thoughts to her as well through written messages. A young maidservant came running to her mistress's chamber just then. "Your Highness, my lady," she courtesied, and proceeded to hand her a rolled-up parchment. "For Mordecai the Jew who stations himself by the gates." She bowed again and exited immediately. Esther had not told anyone of her nationality, for her adoptive father had asked her to conceal her identity. Also, both she and Mordecai had not divulged their relations to each other. To the people in the royal household, he was just her courier of news from outside. She quickly unrolled the scroll, as she was always excited to receive news from her father. But this time, it was not the usual story of daily grind. This one was a warning of imminent danger. Her heart pounded heavily. She had to warn her new husband. Mordecai had overheard both Bigthan and Teresh, who were guards of the city gates, scheming to lay hands on the king. Since they were still on their prolonged honeymoon, the supreme ruler arrived at the queen's residence in high spirits that night. So Esther sought to give him the ominous warning without further delay. She relayed everything that was told her and gave credit to Mordecai the Jew for his loyalty and allegiance to the crown. The king was jilted by the news and called for an investigation into the matter immediately. The plot was proven, the plan uncovered, which convicted the conspirators to the gallows. Having gained back peace of mind and security, the king continued to work to expand his kingdom. He had many of his men promoted, but most especially Haman the Agagite. He advanced him and established his authority over all the princes of the land. Everyone bowed to the king's new right-hand man. Now Haman took pleasure in the admiration and subservience of the people. His heart fattened whenever the people bowed to him, whenever he came in and out. But there was one man in particular who irated him so. There was a single person at the gates who remained in his position, whether standing or sitting, whenever he passed. While everyone paid homage to him, this person would seem oblivious of his presence. For the purpose of indicting the man, he inquired among the guards who he was, and it was told him that he was a Jew by the name of Mordecai. His rage for this insolent fellow grew each day, and he could not keep his mind from thinking of ways to punish the man. In his outrage, he wished to also include the old man's people in his revenge. He now simmered and brewed against the entire Hebrew race as well. Because he was confident that his influence was strong with the king, he presented his case to Ahasuerus, explaining that a peculiar people existed who did not abide fully to the Persian laws. He proposed to have all of them annihilated, as to rid the kingdom of a people who might rise in defiance to the throne. He reasoned that it would be detrimental to their empire to allow these kind of people to proliferate. The king was easily convinced by Haman, so that he afforded him the silver in his treasury for his most trusted official to do as he would with it. He wanted to make certain the mission would also be accomplished. The presentation of Haman was so convincing, the monarch was as determined to rid his nation of any threat to his rule and reign. So it was that the king's scribes wrote down the edict, sealed with the royal signet, and announced far and wide. It was translated to every known tongue, and it proclaimed that all Jews, both young and old, male and female, were to be killed and destroyed on the 13th day, on the 12th month, the month of Adar. In one day, every one of this race were to be eliminated, as well as their possessions to be taken as plunder. The news hit like a suffocating smoke in every Jewish household. Everyone tore their clothes and sat on ashes. Not one person was left who did not weep, travail, or mourn deeply. Mordecai bore the biggest grunt of all. He knew that Haman had taken his defiance not to bow before any other god, statue, or human to heart. Guilt was heaped on Mordecai, and the burden of his people fell upon him greatly. He paced the palace gates in sackcloth, crying loudly and bitterly. As Esther watched him from her balcony, she was aghast at the sight of her father. He looked very sick, tired, and helpless. She knew that something terrible had happened. She swiftly ordered for her maids and eunuchs to inquire as to what was troubling Mordecai, and they came back with bad news. Esther writhed in great anguish, and she too sat in her room weeping and praying. She then sent garments to cover her father, but he would not allow himself to be clothed. She again sent for her trusted attendant Hatak, and Mordecai disclosed to him every detail of Haman's plot to annihilate the Jews. He passed on the copy of the edict which had been issued from their city of Susa, and then he asked for the queen to plead to the king in behalf of their people. Esther was troubled greatly when Hatak came back to convey word for word what Mordecai had told him to tell her. She asked for her eunuch once again to relate to her father that great danger would certainly come upon her, for anyone who approached the king unsummoned, even if she were queen, would be sentenced to death, unless the king would stretch out his royal scepter to pardon the intruder. Mordecai was impassioned. He wanted Esther to realize the gravity of the verdict laid upon the entire Jewish race. He told Hatak to reply to Esther, "Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews, for if you remain silent, relief and deliverance will arise in defense for the Jews, and you and your father's household will perish. Who knows whether you have attained royalty for such a time as this?" Esther was cut to the heart. The truth burned and singed her. Yes, she must take courage and take up a stand. "If I perish, I perish," she announced loudly. "Go tell Mordecai to summon all the people to fast for 3 days, no food or water, and my maidens and I shall do the same. On the 3rd day, I shall approach my husband." On the 3rd day, Esther festooned herself with her best finery and mustered the courage to approach the inner court. King Ahasuerus was on his majestic throne just across the threshold, and immediately spotted her. Her beauty was intoxicating to him at that moment. Esther seemed even more lovely to behold. He did not hesitate to stretch out the royal scepter to her, for he was overjoyed to see his queen, after having not been with her for more than a month. "Up to half my kingdom I shall grant to you, my dearest. What is it you wish to request of me?" Esther then invited her husband to a banquet at her residence and asked for Haman to come as well. The king quickly obliged. He was excited to hear what the queen wanted to tell him, but that night she refrained from conveying the message to him and asked for the two of them to come again the next night and promised to divulge her request then. Haman was so proud of the favor afforded him by the royal couple that he bragged of his good fortune to his family and friends. But he confessed that his happiness was greatly hampered by the sight of Mordecai, who still refused to bow to him. They suggested for him to build gallows to hang his enemy in the morning, so he would dine in peace at the queen's house in the evening. So he took their advice and had builders work overtime to build the execution device. He was excited to have Mordecai hanged as soon, and so he hurried to the palace at first light. Just then, the king was just done going through the book of records, which chronicled all those who had done heroic feats. He had not been able to sleep, for his thoughts had bothered him all night. He realized he had not commended Mordecai for the report he gave in regards to those who had wished to assassinate him. So when Haman came in, he asked him what he would do to honor a man who had pleased the king so. Haman thought the king wanted to exalt him, so he reiterated all that he wished would be done to him. But to his dismay, the king then asked for him to do all that he had suggested to be done for Mordecai. Haman was greatly humiliated, as he ordered for his enemy to be clothed in the royal robes from the king's own wardrobe, and a crown to be put on his head, while he himself sat Mordecai on the king's own horse and led him out to the streets while proclaiming throughout the town square, "This is what is done to the one the king wishes to honor." Haman was enraged when he went home to prepare for his dinner invitation. His entire family sympathized with his misfortune with Mordecai. They saw it as a bad omen, for the Jews were known to have a God who fought for them. Haman had not enough time to think though, for soon it was already time also to attend the queen's dinner. After they had had some wine to start with, the king again asked his wife for what she desired from him, and that was when Esther poured to the king what Haman intended to do to her and her people. Haman's eyes grew wide in horror. He did not know that the queen was of Jewish descent. He was alarmed when he saw the king so angered. While the monarch pounded his fist on the table and turned to vent his anger out in the garden, Haman plunged himself at the queen to plead for his life. The king returned in time to witness the scene of Haman looking like he was assaulting his wife, so that he was all the more enraged. He ordered his soldiers to arrest Haman. Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, then spoke about the gallows Haman had thought to hang Mordecai at. Without hesitation, the king ordered for his discounted official to be executed at the gallows he himself had built. On the day the Jews were to be destroyed, a counter-edict allowing for them to take up arms and defend themselves proved to their advantage. Not one Hebrew soul perished, but they were able to get rid of their enemies instead. 75,000 of those who opposed them died that day. Mordecai was promoted to take the place of Haman as the highest official next to the king. All of his enemies' wealth were handed to him. He was greatly exalted, and he was feared by everyone in the land. So it was that, though she faced great peril, Esther's courageous decision to trust in God implicitly and step out in faith had helped save her people from a great catastrophe. Thank you. We have now reached the end of our story.